Okay, hello everyone. We're just coming from the last day of Hanukkah today, the 8th day, where with a full intensity we lit and kindled 8 flames. And this evening as well has a name in Jewish tradition. Some call it nittel. And there are different customs regarding this evening, because throughout history, this was a night that was not always a pleasant night for Jews who were considered to be Christ killers and so on, due to the Jewish man called Jesus. So this night became a night that was always a fearful night. But at the same time, in Judaism, nothing is negative per se. Everything has positive. And hence the name of the class, When No is Greater Than Yes. So we live in a world, and I want to say that the class is dedicated in honor of Chaim, Sarah, Hillel, Isaac, and Simon Caputo, friends and supporters of the Meaningful Life Center. So thank you. If you want to dedicate a future class, just either contact our office, either by phone, by email, or online at meaningfullife.com. So we live in a world where we, I could say, worship power, worship aggression, worship strength. You know, people who are go-getters or are aggressive are considered the people who are going to succeed in life. And we're told from the youngest of age that if you're not going to go out and get it, no one's going to give it to you. And you see this especially in the business world, which is so dominant in our lives today. It's all about outmaneuvering, being ahead of the curve, being ahead of the game, and essentially being someone who's not timid and passive. But business by definition means that you're going and you're aggressively pursuing customers or clients or projects or recruiting and so on. As we shall discuss, this description itself is a reflection of a major imbalance in life, because it tends to over-exaggerate the power of power, frankly. Because when you talk about all real things, which as I'll discuss later in this class, things like love, truth, God, soul, anything that is real and eternal in our lives, you'll find that the exact opposite approach works. Aggression, power, going and getting it is not the way to access those forces in life. Where, for example, through aggression can you achieve love? If a flower is growing in the ground, can you pull it out with power? Or you have to water it and allow it to emerge? And the same can be said for so many other things in life. So very often when I speak to people who are of that personality type, go-getters, people who feel that they're strong individuals, aggressive, not even necessarily in a negative sense, I always ask them the question, and I ask it now as well, and that is, what do you think is stronger? Power or restraint? Moving forward thrust or restraint? And everyone always thinks about it for a moment, because people don't think of restraint as being a powerful thing. Most people identify restraint as being something resulting from weakness. Why would you be silent? Why would you be restrained? Why would you be pliable or flexible or yielding if you're not weak? Because as I said, in the business world, that can be the suicide if the other side ever sees you as weak. And it's not just in business, frankly, it's almost in anything in life. People who are seen as weak are taken advantage of, are by people who are stronger or are predators. Especially if you think of the world, a dog eats dog type of Darwinian world of survival of the fittest, then clearly the one that is stronger is going to dominate. So it makes you think. Now there is a Mishnah that says, Ezehu Gibber, who is the strong person? And you think that would be someone who can lift the greatest weights. No. HaKevish Esitzre, the one that can control his evil inclination, who can conquer and can self-control, basically. So it's an interesting take on strength. Instead of strength being seen as something that's powerful, that you can lift a lot, or you can push, it's really about, can you control yourself? So does anyone ever think of strength and power as self-control? We don't usually, because as I said, we associate power. Now you go to, for example, to any Olympics or any competition. So you have strongmen competitions. It's all about lifting heavier weights, throwing further, jumping higher. Everything is measured in the context of volume, quantity. Now it's not, and so on. But that shouldn't be surprising because we live in a world of volume and quantity. This world measures quantity. So most people, even though they may not admit it openly, you ask them if you want more quantity or quality, people say I want more quantity. And obviously, the first answer would be I want both. But if it came down to having $100 million versus having a quality of life, most people would choose the 100 million because they think with the 100 million they can buy quality of life, obviously. But this is all just a reflection of and demonstration of the material world in which we live. That power is measured in terms of quantity, volume, strength, height, and so on. The measurements that we are so accustomed with, which is due to the fact that we live in a sensory world. What does that mean? That sensation, our senses, are what drives and defines our lives. What you see, and what you hear, and what you taste, touch, and smell. And all those five senses, one by one, are all measured by volume, by quantity. You see something, you see a bigger building, a shorter building. You'll never see that a smaller building may have more power than a taller building because the eyes only see the surface. So, same thing with the ears. You hear a louder noise, a subtler noise may be more difficult to discern. And same with taste, touch, and smell. So in a human being who's so controlled, and tell me if we're not, completely controlled by our senses, how is it that how is it that we will not worship strength and power in terms of quantity, as I said? And the same question can be asked, just as you ask the question of a person who considers themselves strong and powerful and aggressive. The same question can be asked of people who are writers and communicators, poets even. What's more powerful, words or silence? And you think about that again. The first thing you think communication is all about words. Is it? Is teaching all about what you say? How about what you don't say? And is what you don't say maybe even more powerful and more important than what you do say in true education and true communication? Same thing you can ask an artist or a designer. What's more powerful? What's stronger? The letters on the page or the white space between the letters? The design, the images, or the white space, the empty space that separates images? Most people don't think that way. They think about the black, what you see. You don't think about what you don't see. And across the board, anything in life, anywhere in life, the entire spectrum of life, you can always have this quandary, these two opposites. Let's take love, romance, intimacy. So what's more powerful in intimacy? Aggression or aggression, definition, or the tangible or the intangible? The expression or the non-expression? The mystique or that which you can control? Now we may want to control love, but everyone who knows a little about love knows the mystique is really its power. It's all about something that you don't really know about. That's why it's so powerful. That's why, as the line says, they say it's always more pleasurable to want than to have. And then as soon as you have it, it's not the same thing. So you go across the board in any area of life, you'll find that there is, so to speak, the outer dimensions that so control our lives, and the inner dimensions which are driven by a completely different set of rules. Whereas I said, the no can be sometimes stronger, if not always stronger, than the yes, as we shall discuss. So what I'd like to address in this class is this idea. We live in a world where often we feel intimidated and overpowered and sidelined, frankly, by people who are more aggressive. And some of us just don't want to engage in that battle, in that game. So we choose to defer, we choose to walk away, or we choose to choose other lines of work, not to be engaged in that level. First of all, who likes that competition? Secondly, the whole thing is very distasteful. What we're going to discuss tonight is that the real power lies inside each of us. Not always when you see someone that seems so all-powerful, that you have within you resources that you probably never even accessed, that are not defined by sheer strength and volume. They're defined far more by the invisible. So, for example, if you take, we live now in a quantum mechanic world where subatomic life is as powerful as the microcosm is as powerful as the macrocosm. So if someone were to ask you, what's more powerful? The most powerful firepower of the most powerful weapon on earth, or the nuclear power in a silent, invisible atom? So we all know it's a loaded question today. We all know that the atom can't even be compared. The power of that you can release in a quiet, invisible atom is far, far more than all the forces on earth. Let's take in the human body. We have, let's say, boxers or wrestlers or people like strongmen and so on, who carry a very devastating punch, devastating fist. What's more powerful, that, or your DNA, which again is indiscernible? One mutation in DNA, one shift, can release unfathomable power, far more than anything we can ever imagine. So today it's far easier to understand, because we're living beneficiaries of this invisible, silent world called the beneath the surface, the microscopic subatomic universe that is so much more powerful than anything we ever can measure in the world of sheer volume and quantity. There's much to say about this. We just, as I said, coming from Hanukkah, how do we celebrate Hanukkah? It's interesting. Question that's asked. The war, the battle that was fought by the Maccabees, who are a minority against the majority of the Greco-Syrians, was a battle, a real battle. And what do we say in the prayer of Hanukkah that we just finished? That the miracle was that the mighty mighty were vanquished by the few, and the gibarim biyad chaloshim, the strong, were conquered by the weak. And yet, the holiday is not celebrated through any type of commemoration of the battles fought. For example, the Seder night, which was also battles, the battles against Egypt, and we do commemorate it. We have the 10 plagues that we mentioned. We talk about the way they were drowned in the sea. In Hanukkah, no mention, except in that prayer. There's nothing. How do we celebrate Hanukkah? Through completely something you wouldn't even know is connected to battle. Light. We light a flame. Which is a fascinating lesson in Judaism in general, that we do not worship battles, nor even conquest in battles. In history, you'll find, and it's maybe changed in the last few hundred years, you'll find that the greatest exploits of the greatest leaders were all in battle. And people went to battle just to win a battle, because that would memorialize them forever and ever, for posterity, that they were the vanquishers. You read the stories of Napoleon, Genghis Khan, even Alexander the Great and others. Battle and winning a battle was the sign of real power, because you vanquished, you conquered a foe, an adversary, and you demonstrated your strength. And people built monuments, and it was a whole thing. Parades, everything around battles. Even today, I don't know if you know this, but there's one of these TED Talks. I heard it in a British psychologist, a child psychologist, educational psychologist, makes the point that schooling today in the Western world, including the United States, was all shaped. Who developed the first curricula that we use in schools today? It was Frederick the Great and Napoleon. And that's why it's called elementary school, because elementary is a military word. Because their focus was to educate children to become good warriors. So their focus of education is primarily on, you'll see, the tangible, the physical sciences, efficiency. And things like art, music, are always considered extracurricular activities. And he makes this point that children are frankly far more natural, art and music is far more natural to them than mathematics and engineering. But they wanted to create efficient warriors. So even the schooling system that you may think is so peaceful is all driven by essentially an element of efficiency, and therefore we grow up in a world where we worship and value, as I said at the outset, quantity, power, aggression, conquest. Those are the values that we learn, that you learn in school. Obviously, if it's a good school, they'll teach you to do it ethically, but it's still driven by that success is driven not by by love or by kindness or by empathy. It's driven by aggression. But aggression has to be balanced with a sense of conscience and a sense of morality and ethics and so on and laws. I mean, Karl Marx, and I'm no Marxist, so don't take this the wrong way. Karl Marx, in his scathing critique of capitalism, many of his points are very legitimate. Anyone who reads them knows they're legitimate. The problem is he didn't offer a viable alternative. But one of the big scathing attacks is that capitalism is driven by greed. And greed is driven by privatization of property, all about me, not you. It's me against you. The competition of it is built in that you become what he calls in German alienation. He has a German word for it. Alienation from others, alienation from yourself, alienation from the product, alienation from your employees and employers. And you see this especially in the financial business industries. You'll see that type of attitude, bosses playing workers against each other because everybody wants to climb the ladder, and your competition is your colleague. Your competition may be your best friend, frankly. And how many loyalties and friendships have been destroyed in that pursuit? So this is a world in which we live where the worship, as I said, of quantity. But it's also very clear in our world, everyone, as I just mentioned, DNA, subatomic particles. Power, where is real power? Lies in forces that we can't even see and forces that don't make any sound. So our sensory world, meaning our five senses, as I described at length before, are all stimulated by and affected by volume, quantity, and so on. Jews always knew that what you worship is not the conquest of a battle. That may be necessary, but as a necessary evil or as a last resort. But how do you celebrate the conquest is light. You light a candle, you light a flame. And that's what we do, even for a yahrzeit, even for the yahrzeit of the 6 million. You know, we could yell in outrage and our blood boils over what was done, dehumanization of our own brothers and sisters and people our own families, and it could have been us if we were there. And yet, at the end of the day, we do not become like like those that killed us. We value and celebrate light and life. And light is a central metaphor, a central theme in Judaism, especially if you're familiar with Kabbalistic and Hasidic teachings, or Ein Sof, the divine light, the infinite light, the infinite energy. And until 100 years ago, Einstein, and then the discoveries about the power of light, light was not a central component in the so-called secular world. It was known, of course, light, without light you can't see where you're going. But the power of light as a scientific force, as energy, was something the Jews always from the beginning. Look at the temple. What was the temple had many vessels and many features and many functions, but the menorah stands out as being the B'halei Chesaneres, kindling the menorah. Light. And I've discussed in the past in many classes, last week as well, with the metaphor of light and the different elements of light, its transcendence, its defying gravity, its ability to illuminate, to warm. Here's not the place to go into that, discuss that at length. Here I'd rather focus on far more the element of quality over quantity. So we live in a world that worships quantity, and we all know that the most valuable thing is quality. And how do you balance those two? And how do you function in a world where, without escaping and living an ascetic lifestyle to some mountain, function in a world that is dog eats dog and still maintain that balance of understanding, appreciating, as saying that the no is greater than the yes, that the power of restraint is greater than the power of action. So that's the essential discussion that I'm leading into. So when we look at ourselves and our own inner potential, again, most of us discover, either through accident or through education or through whatever, or life experience, trial and error, we discover our so-called strengths, our qualities, our skills. And most of us maybe will never discover all of them in our lifetime, but hopefully we discover some of them. And it usually does not happen, as I said, by plan. It happens by accident, so to speak. You're in summer camp, suddenly pressure, someone else can't do the job, it suddenly falls on you, and suddenly realize, hey, I can do this. Very few people from young age, someone identifies and says, hey, you're good at this. It does happen, but it's not as common. But that's one set of strengths. But there's a whole other set of strength which is called the ability of restraint. And as I said before, most people see restraint and yielding and silence as a sign of weakness, cowardice, retreat, and so on. That's because, as I mentioned, we live in a world where what you value is what you see. You'll never appreciate, for example, how much restraint, how much discipline or an educator invested in you, because it's invisible. How can you know? As I mentioned before, in the world of design or the world of art, what's more powerful, the white space or the black space? The letters you see or the white space that surrounds them? And the same is true, as I mentioned, almost in every other area of life. So there's a long discussion in Jewish thought about these two different modes, the yeses and the nos, so to speak. And why is it not balanced in between? Why is it not half yes and half no? Why is one more than the other? Sometimes actually they're compared to the white blood cells and the red blood cells. There are more white blood cells in the body than there are red. The ones that fight infection are more abundant than the ones that bring oxygen to the blood. So why is there more no's than yeses? So there's an interesting argument between Rabbi Akiva and Rabbi Yishmael, who was the high priest. And there's an argument that when you read it initially, it sounds like complete semantics, which is the turnoff of so many people of splitting hairs that don't seem to make any difference. Like the story with the rabbi that, the guy gets lost in a hot air balloon. And with a friend of his, and they're trying to find out where they are. They see somebody down below, and they yell down. They say, "Where are we?" And he says, "You're in a hot air balloon." Okay, and a gust of wind comes, whisks away the balloon, and they're left lost as they were before. So one guy said to the others, "That must have been a rabbi." He says, "How do you know?" Because what he said was true, but irrelevant. It's true, they were in a hot air balloon, but it didn't help anybody. So much of Judaism is mocked at, especially in the Woody Allen genre of cynicism, that includes the splitting of hairs. So here's the argument of Rabbi Shmuel and Rabbi Akiva. And as I said, initially it's going to sound almost like, what is this argument about? So in the Ten Commandments, as I said, you have positives and negatives. You have Anochi, I am your God. But then it says, Lo, do not have other gods. Then it says, Zachar, remember Shabbat, honor. Then it says, do not kill, do not murder, do not steal, etc. Do not covet. So when the Jews heard these 10 commandments, here's the argument. What did they say? They responded to each one of them. So Rabbi Akiva says that when they heard do this, they said yes. And when they, let's start with Rabbi Yishmael, it's easier. Rabbi Yishmael says that when they heard the yeses, they said, yes, we shall do. And when they heard the no's, they said, no, we shall not do. Right? Makes sense. Like if someone gives you a list of instructions, they ask you to confirm. So you say yes to the yeses and no to the no's. Rabbi Akiva disagrees. To the yeses, yes, they said yes. To the no's, they also said yes. Yes, we won't do it. So what is really, this is the argument between Rabbi Akiva and Rabbi Yishmael. So here's the big question. What are they arguing about? The conclusion is the same. Rabbi Akiva is not saying, God forbid, that yes, we won't listen to you and we'll do it. Yes means we won't do it, yes. They answered yes to all 10 commandments, the positives and negatives, they said yes to. And Rabbi Yishmael says, to the yeses they said yes, and to the no's, no, we will not do it. So what's the difference between no, we will not do it, and yes, we won't do it? It's the same meaning, right? Why would they argue about such a thing? Okay. Instead of giving you all night to think about it, I'll tell you the answer. One of the answers. The answer is an extremely powerful answer as well. And not only powerful, you'll see two paths of ways of thinking about life. And not only that, you'll see how it applies actually to Rabbi Akiva and Rabbi Shmuel's own history and personality. So it's not just a little argument. It actually happens to be two philosophies of life. What they were discussing was, obviously the Jews were complying to what they heard in the commandments. The question is, when they heard a no, what did they hear in it? The yes of it, or they heard the no of it? What that means is the following. In other words, if you hear somebody say, do not go down this path, so you can say, fine, it's something to avoid, it's dangerous, it's destructive, it's not what God wants, it's inappropriate, whatever. And that's it, it's over with, you avoid it, and goodbye, Charlie. Rabbi Akiva, however, appreciated something much deeper than Rabbi Yishmael, and you'll see in a moment why. What do you appreciate? That even when you avoid something, there's also an energy that you exert. It's just that you're not exerting positive energy, you're exerting restraint, avoiding something. So who says that's no? Maybe it's a yes of a different sort. So he recognized the yes, the positive energy, even in a situation that you are avoiding. The power of restraint, which we all know sometimes can be far more powerful than the power of action. Because it may not be difficult to go down a path that is pleasant. But to avoid another path that seduces you and is very powerful, and to say no may require far more energy from you than the yes. Which is why the Talmud says, Hayeshev v'lei over avera, somebody who avoids sin. Actually, avera should be really translated as displacement. Someone that avoids displacing, meaning wandering away from themselves, or sin, it's considered as if they did a mitzvah. How could you say that? They didn't do anything. You just sat around, didn't act. Because the exertion that you need to avoid doing something that's wrong can be just as powerful, if not more, than doing something positive. Now, why did Rabbi Akiva appreciate that and Rabbi Shmuel didn't? Remember, Rabbi Shmuel's approach is not wrong. It's just a different approach, because Rabbi Akiva and Rabbi Shmuel came from two diametric opposites on the social spectrum. Rabbi Shmuel was a high priest. He was born in royalty, he was born with privilege, and he was born with education, and he became the high priest. So, in his world, he lived in light all his life. So for him, when there's darkness or there's something to avoid, fine, you avoid it, and that's that. Rabbi Akiva, on the other hand, was two opinions. Some say he was a convert himself. Some say he was a child of converts. And we know that he did not grow up in a family of education and privilege, definitely Jewish education. Till age 40, as a matter of fact, he knew nothing. And it was when he met the daughter of Kalba Sapua, a whole story, how she inspired him to begin a journey, the famous story with the drops of water, where he was walking down a path and he was wondering, she had encouraged him, she said, she wanted to marry him, of course, and she encouraged him to start studying and she recognized great mind there, great talent. And he said, I'm 40 years old. What could you start doing when you're 40 years old? And 40 then, you can imagine, was like, life expectancy in 1930 was 32. So 40 was really old then. Today, 40 is young. But still, 40 is not 5. 40 is not 10, as many of us are aware of. So he was walking in the woods, and he noticed a waterfall. The story goes, and he sees the water dropping. And then he noticed a stone right near this bank right near the edge of the water, of the riverlet, the little stream. And the stone was interesting. It had a hole bore through it, like someone had drilled a perfect hole right through the stone. He was wondering, who here in the middle of nowhere in this wilderness would have borne a stone? Then he realized that the water dropping from the waterfall kept hitting the stone in that hole, kept dropping in there. So he realized over the years, drop by drop by drop, the antithesis of Chinese torture, it finally bore a hole. So he said to himself, that's the lesson in my life, that if an inanimate stone can be pierced with just plain water, with time, how much more a soul and a life and a mind, that even though he's 40, if he exerts himself and invests and applies himself, could pierce his own so-called ignorance and past. As a result, what happens is he goes off with her permission. They marry, and his wife gives him permission to go off to study. And he comes back years later with thousands and thousands of students, to the point that he, Rabbi Akiva, became the master of all Talmud. He's called Kula Liba de Rabbi Akiva. Everything follows Rabbi Akiva's teachings in the Talmud. That's how great of a scholar he became. So Rabbi Akiva and Rabbi Shmuel, two different ends of the spectrum. Rabbi Akiva, through his hard-earned effort, was in darkness. He was in the no, and he discovered the yes and the no. Rabbi Shmuel never was privileged. He didn't see much no in his life. So for him, it was a theory to avoid challenges. But Rabbi Akiva lived in them. He was immersed in them. He lived a life where he did not have privilege, he did not have education, did not have Torah, and yet he discovered that through his deep thirst and the effort that comes sometimes from the negative, you reach far greater place than you can through the positive. So he was able to see in the no's the yes, in the N-O-S, not N-O-S-C, just to make it clear. So what's stronger, yes or no? You know is stronger, except in our world we don't recognize and appreciate it. I was privileged a few weeks ago to have a new grandchild, my grandson. It was in California. So having the privilege to see little children close up, your own grandchildren, I observe, I study them all the time. And they teach you tremendous lessons in life because they're the better version of ourselves, with all due respect to all the adults here in the room. If you disagree, it's your right, but that's my humble opinion. As opposed to technology, where iOS 6 is better than 5 and 5 is better than 4. Well, sometimes with Windows it doesn't work that way, but usually it's supposed to get better. I think with human beings it's the other way around. Version 1 is better than version 2, version 3, as the layers unfold. So I was speaking to my granddaughter, she's 6 years old, and I said to her, it was an experiment. I said to her, I would like to give you something. What? I'm very excited to hear. She says, $100 million. And she just ran away without even, had I said to her I was going to give her a coloring book or a little doll or something like that, she would have been so excited. So I said, so what's the matter? Is there something wrong with us or something wrong with her that she doesn't appreciate the value of $100 million? It's a lot of money. I know. I say, I'm sure you're wondering what would happen if she said, okay, give it to me. Where would I get it from? But I was confident that she wouldn't care. So that's why I was able to, I was just confirming a theory. So I was wondering, so what happens to us? What happens? And I'm not suggesting money is not valuable. But here's a child, a pure child. What is it? So many of us say they're just stupid, naive, they don't appreciate money. Or maybe maybe they're closer to the truth than we are. They know what's real and what's not real. What's permanent and what's an illusion of power. But it was, for me, a perfect example of what we consider to be the most valuable thing. It's completely meaningless. It would be as if you went to another planet where dust was not dust but gold or diamonds. And people here, it's just dust. Everybody walks on it because there's so much of it, nobody really cares. It's just a contrast. And so many other things. I'm studying my little grandchild, just a few weeks old, a month actually, yesterday. And you look at, obviously, they cannot have communication. So I say to myself, who's more powerful? The powerful adult that wields weapons and wields influence and equity and so on, or this little child in its innocence? The answer is very obvious. However, we don't value that because there's nothing in it for me, so to speak. In a me world, what do I get from that? But then we start thinking about the real things in life: love, truth, God, soul, happiness, peace of mind. Tell me, where exactly do you find those things? You find that in the domain of the invisible. You find it in the domain that is not possible to acquire. There's no aggression in the world that can get all of the things I just listed. Even though we'd like to believe there is. If I'm aggressive or go-getter, I'll get all the... That's not true. I'd like to see anyone that ever has gained any of the things I mentioned before. Love, intimacy, God, soul, truth, happiness. And I mentioned the analogy, beautiful analogy, I think. You try to pull a tug, a flower out of the ground. Is that how you're going to get it to grow? Or you water it, you're patient, sun, time, and suddenly it emerges and the petals open up. So why is that different in us human beings when we want love from another person? Maybe what you have to do is water that person. Maybe you have to nurture. Learn to appreciate that the biggest thing, the most important things in life are not acquired, but they emerge. And they take a process and cannot be achieved through an acquisition, through one act. Everything in life is that way. Talk about children being born, children going through 9 months of gestation, of pregnancy, and then growing into adulthood. These are all realities of life. This is nature at work. No technology in the world is going to speed up the gestation process. I hope not, at least. And no technology in the world can make a flower grow faster. I know there's simulation, and I know that today we do kinds of so-called replication and so on and so forth, but it's still the true things in life require that type of process. So the question now is in our own selves. Think about confidence, self-confident people. Is a self-confident person reflected more in aggression or in restraint? So there's a verse in the Torah, a very powerful verse. It's the story in the Nevi'im, in the book of, I think, book of Malachim, maybe, or Samuel, Eliyahu Hanavi, Elijah the prophet. So he was awaiting to have a rendezvous with God. okay, after a particular event. And as he's waiting, he suddenly hears loud thunders, rash. So he stares, and the thunder, God must be in that thunder. No, God's not there. Then he sees a bright lightning, Aish, fire, and wonders if God is there, and God is also not there. And then comes a very strong wind. And then he thinks God is in the wind, and he's also not. And then comes the next verse that says, following those things, the thunder, the loud sounds, the bright light, and the great strong wind, came Kel Dmama Daka. 3 words in Hebrew, very, very hard to translate, to be honest, in English. I'll try my best. Kel is a sound. Dmama means very subtle, or silent even. Dmama comes from the word silent. Very gentle silent. And Daka is subtle. So basically a very gentle or subtle, subtle sound or voice. And that's where God emerges. So it's an interesting, think of the visualization. I don't know if any of you have seen a famous movie, 2001, Stanley Kubrick's 2001. And most people who see it don't really get what the theme is, what's exactly. It's very abstract. People know about HAL, the computer, etc. But the story, essentially, is the story of finding the origin of our species. Where's the root of? Where did it all begin? And many essays and books have been written in analyzing the film, of what it means and all that. But there's one interesting scene there at the end, when and I hope it's not a spoiler for those that want to see it, but it doesn't matter. It won't make a difference. That when they finally come, so to speak, to the beginning of time and try to understand where did it all begin, the last scene is a baby, a fetus, a newborn or about to be newborn child. That's the image at the end of the whole film of their discovery where it all begins. A newborn child, the innocence of a child. And when you, especially if you're familiar with the psychological schools of thought about the inner child, where some theorize that all of us are looking to regain the inner child. It's like re-entering paradise, the innocence. Some say Steven Spielberg's main genius, which really put him over the top, was his ability to touch that child in each person, the enchantment. His early films were all about that. The enchantment that each of us so seeks. Because once we grow into the adult world, we become jaded, we become skeptical, cynical, we've been burned, and we lose a lot of our idealism. That's the way the trajectory works. But every one of us is searching for that child. I'm not trying to be, I know some people, their entire body of knowledge is based on lines from different Hollywood movies. So I don't want to sound like that at all. But I want to use another film as an example. You may have heard, some considered the greatest of all, Citizen Kane, by Orson Welles. And who plays it? It's supposed to be a story about Randolph Hearst, the big magnate, media magnate who was a super ego, etc. And there too, the story is all about what they call what's the name of the sled? I forgot already. Okay, yeah, what? Rosebud. So the whole film is Rosebud. And you have to watch the film 5 times, by the way, to figure that out. But that's another story. So Rosebud, that he says in his last words before he dies, Kane. William Kane, that Rosebud, until you finally discover Rosebud is the sled that he had when he was a little child before he was taken away from his parents to go to the big city. It was his innocence. And that too has been analyzed to death. The analysis that each person is seeking the child that once was innocent, the love that we deserved. How much has been written about how in relationships we're really looking for a love that we either never got or didn't get adequately from our parents. And all our relationships are based on that, on what shaped us when we were children. Now this shouldn't surprise anyone that studies Torah, because the Torah is all based on this concept. There's Adam and Eve in the Garden of Eden, the pure paradise. Then they are expelled from it. And the rest of history is about trying to rediscover paradise. Some call it the fountain of youth. Some call it eternity. Everybody, some call it Botox. Everybody has a name for it. People looking for the innocence, the youth, the untouched fallen snow before it's been trampled upon in our lives. And that resonates with us. When we hear music or we have other experiences that touch a deep part inside your heart and soul, what's it touching? It's touching an innocent place. And there's something about innocence that everyone's affected by. Obviously there's some people who become so hardened they don't even look. So Kol Dmama Daka is the essence of it all. God may have created a very sophisticated universe with many fireworks and many winds and lightning and thunder, but the purity, the essence of it all is a very subtle force that's just surrounded by all this hoopla. And that's an interesting way how the Kabbalists and the Hasidic masters explained existence. That existence is a very big place and sounds very impressive and very overwhelming. But at the end of the day, what really controls it all is silent voice within, the quiet silent voice. So as Churchill said during time of war, the truth is so precious, you have to surround it with with an army of lies. So sometimes the same is with us, that we live in a world of lies, so we surround ourselves with lies, but really what lies within is just a very simple person that wants a little love. Again, you have so many stories which very often, it all comes down to someone's just trying to protect their young. And that's why they have all this aggression and all this anger and all that's going on. It's really just almost a masquerade. The porcupine has the sharpest needles of all creatures on earth. But it has also the softest underbelly. And it's not an accident. Because to protect its gentleness, its tenderness, it needs to have those needles. It's similar to the story of the oyster and the pearls. You know where natural pearls come from? Natural pearl is really an outgrowth of just some irritation of an irritated oyster, to put it in non-romantic terms. An oyster is within the shell of the oyster is very gentle skin, and if a piece of dust lands on that skin, it's like a piece of dust on your eyeball. We can know how irritating that is, and it's very irritating. So what the oyster does, it secretes a liquid that hardens around the dust, so the dust should not irritate it, and that becomes a pearl. Okay. How are diamonds formed? Similar, pressure, years of pressure. And now to lead it back to our discussion here, the Kol Dmama Daka, the Kabbalists say the following: each of us has a very unique song inside of us. It's a melody that your soul identifies with. Because as I've discussed many times, souls only communicate through song, through music. Souls can only travel through song. Bodies travel with our legs, with our feet, with our vehicles, but a soul is moved by a song. So you could have people who have millions of frequent flyer miles and they haven't moved an inch in their lives, spiritually and emotionally. And you can have someone who doesn't move anywhere physically, has no miles, and sits in one place and moves millions of miles emotionally. And they get moved and know how to move someone else. So this song lies embedded within us, and it is so-called, think of it, your truth. It's your purest, stillest, quiet place. Now, why don't you hear this song? Why don't others hear it? Well, for a simple reason. Because we have rush hour of our lives that makes a lot of noise. You ever hear, for example, you could have a very beautiful, fine-tuned violin playing a beautiful melody, but if there's a lot of outside noise in the streets or other noise that distracts, what will happen? It'll drown out the subtle. You all probably have heard the Bell experiment. What was his first name? He was a great violinist who was known to be one of the best in the world, and he actually would play in concerts, and it was like sold out audiences, expensive tickets. They tried an experiment. The Bell. What was the experiment? Bell sat in Washington, D.C., in the national, in the main subway terminal, with his Stradivarius, which is like $1 million violin, sat on a milk carton and played beautiful music. And they filmed it. Everybody walks by and doesn't even notice it. The only ones that notice it from time to time are little children. And when the little children try to get closer, what happens is the adults schlub them and say, "We have no time. We got to get to this. We got to get to the train." The same, had this been advertised that this was Bell playing in Carnegie Hall, you couldn't get tickets. So the lesson is quite self-understood. Because people are so busy with their lives, they won't appreciate the greatest gift. And if you tell them, and it's an exclusive, "Hey, I want tickets, not someone else," when it gets to that competition and ego, suddenly they're online. And here he is for free. You can listen to the most beautiful melodies on the most expensive violin. So the question is, how many of such experiences in our life do we miss as a result of our rush hours? Do we even know what our song sounds like? So you want to know what power is? You think power lies in the domain of people who have aggression and go-getters? That's power. That's on instant gratification power. That's for the moment. Power is someone who's in touch with their song inside. Because first of all, then you're in control of yourself. You know what is priority and what's not. And number two, you then have the confidence to make your choices. You know, the Talmud says that shtika, mila besela, that a word is worth $1 and silence is worth 2. For this reason, tell me, an intelligent person who has what to say about a certain subject, where do they have to exert more energy? To make a statement or to withhold a statement? It's obvious. For a fool who always talks or doesn't have anything, it doesn't take any effort. For a wise person who has a comment or a opinion to state about a particular matter and they choose not to, it takes more effort than to state it, because he or she has what to say. In teaching and educating and in communicating, and I can tell this to you from my own experience, what you don't say is much more powerful than what you do say. When people come to you for advice, for example, and let's say you listen to them closely and you hear all the facts, and then what's your plan? Let's say you do have, let's say for argument's sake you have clarity of what that person should do. Should you tell them what to do or not? And I'll show you the argument both ways. On one hand, of course, tell them. I mean, they came to you for help. Why don't you tell them what to do? Simple as that. Well, because there's a few reasons. Number one, you may tell them what to do. Number one, they may not listen because they don't think it's right, and they're not really ready to hear what you have to say. They did come to you, but they may have too many resistances. Number two, even if they do what you say, that's right now. What about in a month from now or a year from now? And you're not there. Have you really empowered that person? Or you just gave them advice and told them what to do? What's more important? To empower and let them understand themselves what to do, so when they get into situations similar or otherwise, they now have a methodology, or you just answer the questions for them. So let's rephrase it in a context. Let's present it in a different context. Who is a greater teacher? A teacher answers your questions or teaches you how to answer your own questions? The answer is obvious. One teaches answers and the other teaches methodology. And methodology is forever, because it trains your mind how to answer. So if you really find a good teacher, you should ask that teacher, I don't just want answers, I want to know how you find the answers. What is your method that you use to find an answer? Because then you're going into the concept of empowerment, of thinking the right way, of the correct way of thinking, the right mindset. Where are the blind spots? Where is the subjectivity or the other impediments getting in the way? That's far greater. But again, in the instant gratification, fast food world in which we live, we want quick answers. Give me the answer. I'm not interested in more than that. But a great teacher will not ever buy into that. They will have the restraint to teach you to learn how to answer, not just what to answer. And the how to is far, far greater because it lasts forever. Because even when that teacher is no longer here, or they're no longer in your presence, you have the method. And a method is far greater more important than just knowing what to do in this situation. So you see, even though the inclination or the temptation would be, let me just answer that person's question and let me just tell them what to do, far, far more difficult and more restraint and more energy in the no than in the yes, in what not to say than what to say. Now, I'm not saying it's always that clear. Sometimes you need to really weigh these two. Sometimes people do need more, sometimes less, so they have to gauge these things. But nevertheless, you see from this that it's much more complicated than just, okay, yeah, let me tell you exactly what it is. Also, people have pride, and they have denial, and they have ego, and all these, and shame. These factors are also important. You can't just come to somebody and say, and it's like almost the blessing of denial. Denial we usually see as a very negative thing. You're in denial, you're not ignoring, you don't even know there's a problem, blah, blah, blah. But denial also has a virtue to it, if it's moderation. What is the virtue? Your system cannot yet tolerate the shock or the intensity of a particular revelation. So maybe it's healthy to have some denial. People who go through very serious trauma, denial actually saves their life. It buffers it. It weakens the blow. Now, denial is no good if it destroys your life, if it completely takes over, and you're completely living in la la land or you're completely out of touch. But denial, but appreciating when a person has resistance is also part of proper education. It's like, I don't want to use the word spoon feeding, but it's like holding someone's hand and helping them learn to walk. And that takes time. You cannot force it. It takes time for people to get over certain shocks, certain revelations, and it takes time to absorb. People say, I want to hear the whole truth, the whole naked truth as it is. Is anyone you know on earth that wants to hear the whole 100% truth? Would you really want to see the 100% truth of what you look like? In its good and its bad? I don't think so. There's a Hasidic story they tell about this guy that spent all his life looking for the truth. He traveled all over the world. Spent his whole life. He was a real serious seeker. He finally meets someone. And now he's already become an older man. He still has not found what he's looking for. He meets someone who he sees as a real sage and says, I'm spending my whole life looking for the truth. Maybe you could help. So the man says to him, the sage, how important is it to you? He says, what do you mean? My whole life I've spent. Trust me, I've pushed away many opportunities just to find the truth. I'm ready to pay anything for it. Ready to give anything. Not just money, my energy, whatever it takes. Okay, I'll give you the benefit of the doubt. And he gives them instructions, directions to travel to a certain distant land. When you come to this place, go to a particular forest, and there you'll find, in the middle of nowhere, you'll find this palace, this castle. And he does all that, and he says, there you'll find what's called the House of Truth. Okay, long story short, I'm not going to go through the whole dramatics of it. He embarks on the journey, he arrives, he finds the palace. He enters this big, big hall. It's like huge. And the sight that's most glaring and most obvious, you see rows and rows and rows, endless rows of flames. Candles and flames. They're all burning. And of all shapes and colors and sizes, there are tall flames and there are short flames and little ones and wide ones. Flames and flames. And it's a sight to behold. Doesn't know what it means, but he sees it all. Then suddenly a man comes over, the caretaker of the place. What are you doing here? He tells him, listen, this sage sent me here. It's the world of emes, of truth. Yes, it is. What are all these flames? He says, the flame is the story of every person's life. So every person on earth has a flame in this room. They're the very fresh flames are the newborns. The ones that are about to burn out are the older people about to die. The flames that are very expressive are people who have accomplished a lot in their lives. You'll see flames that are very dim and weak. There are people who are more depressed. He gave them the whole rundown, how each flame tells the story of the soul of the person. Now, of course, the next question is, where's my flame? He wants the truth, the emes. He wants to see his own flame. He's going to see the truth of who he is. So the caretaker tells him, okay, you go down row C, flames 85, whatever it is. And he slowly, tentatively makes his way down the aisle. Finally, from a distance, he's looking, getting closer, closer. And as he gets closer, to his shock and dismay, the flame is about to burn out, which means his life is about to end. He gets so disturbed by it, he looks around if anybody's watching. He doesn't think anyone's watching. and he goes over to another flame and takes the oil from the flame and pours it into his own flame. To give himself a little more time. And suddenly he sees the eyes, the staring eyes of the caretaker. And the caretaker says, so you're ready to pay any price for the truth, right? He finally met the truth and he couldn't handle it. That's the story. He had to pour oil in. He came for the truth, but it was too much for him. This is the story. Truth is not always what we necessarily want. What we want is a truth that we can digest. That would be a more accurate answer. And hopefully as you digest a little more truth, a little more, you can ultimately find deeper truths and deeper truths. Because we live in a world which is a false world, and many of us have plenty of false stuff in us. Things, our duplicities, our lies, our deceptions, our masks and costumes we wear. Everybody has them. Sometimes it's not necessarily malicious or dangerous or destructive. It's just the adjustment. Do you show the same face to every person that you meet every day? Obviously not. People you trust, you're more open to. People you trust less, you're less open to. That's part of the reality of a world that as adults we learn to have to adjust to a world that's not all truth. And sometimes you have to wear the garments of those that surround you. So I'm not suggesting that we are outright liars, even though some can argue that as well. But in some way we all have elements of, let's call it, not total 100% truth. Only God is pure truth. And that's why God says you cannot see me and live. No person can see God and live and remain who they are. So our journey is to find elements of truth, and more until we can absorb more and grow into them. And go back to what I was saying was that a good teacher recognizes all of this. A good advisor will recognize this. They'll recognize that you have to learn to package that truth or communicate it in a way that the child or the student can hear. And that's not being, God forbid, manipulative or deceptive. It's simply the way to communicate. That's communication. So sometimes the restraint, what you don't say, is far more powerful than what you do say. And I could go on and on with a list of all kinds of different examples where we have these powers within us. However, let's go back to the main key issue. If you're insecure, living in an insecure world, you can't afford to rely on these forces and power of restraint because people will perceive you as weak. And you perceive yourself as weak. So what do? We develop all these aggressive tools to try to demonstrate, hey, no, I'm a force to be reckoned with. In an interesting way, even though I don't like to generalize, it's almost very much connected to, as Kabbalah Hasidic thought puts it, to the feminine and masculine energy. Masculine energy in general is more aggressive. Feminine energy is more intimate. Kvuda bas melech pnima. The dignity of the queen, of the princess, is within. Dignity is an internal thing. But we live in an external world. So who suffers most in a world where materialism is worshipped? The one that has less power. Since a man has physically more brute power, it's the woman that will be often subjugated to that, in the physical sense, even in a sexual sense, and as well as in power. That's why you have men, especially in the Western world, the entire world, control. And women are still struggling to find equanimity, salary-wise, respect-wise, and so on. And will sexual harassment ever fully end? Can you legislate it? As they say, men will be men. So you could legislate to some extent. But if a person doesn't have an internal compass of what means respect, they'll follow the laws because they may not want to be prosecuted. They don't want to be caught. But do they really change? So speaking beyond women and men as in the gender, feminine energy and masculine energy is far less appreciated in the world at which we live. Because feminine energy is the gentle, subtle voice. And when I say feminine energy, I even mean the feminine within the masculine. Because both they overlap and they both include the other. So it's about appreciating the inner life as opposed to the outer life that suffers most in a world like ours. That's why, as a sociologist that comes from time to this class, a sociologist. And I once asked him, we had a conversation, I said to him, so how do you measure a successful society? So he gave me all the usual suspects, the list of the grocery list. What is it? The standard of living, the life expectancy, medicine, access to the utilities, water, the hunger, the level of hunger. And by all those measures, we live in the most advanced society ever. Then he asked me, which was of course where I was leading to, so how does the Torah measure society? I said, by one thing and one thing only. The status, the health of the family and the children. I remember he looked at me and he said to me, oh, well, if it's that the case, this society may be the worst in history. Well, we don't know if it's the worst, but it's definitely not up there. So a very interesting, different definition. See, he defined it all by what I said at the outset of the class, by volume, by quantity, by what you measure. You measure. People have the median salary is today triple that it was, 50 years ago. Even accounting for inflation, etc. People own homes, measured by material success. And I'm not saying that doesn't have a measure. However, it has nothing to do with real life. It's to do with external life. And it's a blessing. When you want to know what a society really is like, the heartbeat of a society, the soul, look at how functional families are. Are children growing up in healthy homes? Are they secure and confident? And when I say children, in a way also, why do I mention women? Because women very much represent that side as well. And not that women can't work and don't work and so on, but work goes back to the measure of again, salaries and success and career. I'm talking about home life, family life, love. So everybody suffers, the men, the women, and the children. But who is at the brunt of the suffering? The children, number one, and I think the women, number two, and the men, number three. Not that the men don't need it all, but they, in a sense, take advantage of their strength and their power, and they dominate and they hide behind that. So everybody needs the inner life that I'm describing. So therefore, as we look in a world like ours, and that every day technology accelerates to the point that we feel such enormous power in our hands. The mobile phone you can do anything with. All information, anytime, anywhere. So it creates the illusion of even further power, when it reflects nothing on inner life. Absolutely nothing. Because you can have all the gadgets in the world and be a complete miserable, dysfunctional human being. And you can have no gadgets and none of the benefits of this modern world and be the most healthy, confident, secure individual. They completely do not reflect on one another. Absolutely not. There's not one thing that you would say would cause someone to be more confident or secure or emotionally healthy as a result of technology. You may get a message, technology may deliver to you an article or a message that helps you find confidence. Okay, then it's doing its job of delivering, but not the technology per se. That's simply because it's a way of communicating a message. And yes, if you're in touch with a good friend and you can Skype or speak on the phone or some other way communicate, fine. That's the people involved. And the technology then is being used for the right purpose. But it's not the empowerment of having 50,000 cable channels at your fingertips that makes the difference. So it's increasingly more difficult in our world to get people to get excited about their inner souls. And that's why, unfortunately, the only time really people wake up is when they suffer, when they lose something, when there's a transition. But we don't have to wait for that. That's the objective. We have to recognize that within each of us, as we sit right now, lies, number one, a tremendous amount of power. And the reason you're not confident in yourself is not because you don't have what it takes, it's because you don't know you have what it takes. It's a very big difference. Because your soul was given to you by God. That's not man-made. So right there, you're already a head start. That you have a divine force inside of you that is your birthright, that nobody can take away from you because no one gave it to you. So why shouldn't that give you complete confidence? And it's something divine. It's not a human, a human being gives you a gift. It lasts as long as it lasts. And just like they gave it to you, they can take it. But here's a divine force that defines your being, like I always say, and I write in Toward a Meaningful Life. Birth is God saying you matter. Your mere birth, your existence is valuable because you were put here by the creator of it all. So that should give us the most confidence possible. However, we're not aware. It's like that silent voice inside of us called Mamadaka. It's drowned out by other things. It's drowned out by a mother telling you you're worthless, a father yelling at you for other reasons. Or you have a whole bunch of voices and ghosts and skeletons that disempower you and basically block your access to your own soul. So you don't feel that you're confident. Even though you have everything it takes, you're not aware of it. Which is a first step. Why? Because then the work is becoming aware. It's not finding that resource, it's just being aware that you have that resource. It's a very big difference. If someone says to you, you have to now work the rest of your life to find a resource that is not yours. Very different to say it's in you, right now, embedded, but you don't have access, or you don't know how to enter. That's a very, very big difference. So the first step is to surround yourself with people that give you the courage and continuously validate and say you have that resource, that you have that indispensable value, you have that koil de mamadaka, you have that silent or gentle, subtle voice inside of you. The question now is, how do you access it? So how you access it is the more soulful activities you do, the more you access it. The more materialistic activities you do, the less you access it. It's very simple. Because materialism worships that which does not give you real confidence. It worships that which you don't think you have enough of. Whereas soulful activity makes your soul come alive, and therefore your soul wants nurturing and wants activity, which is essentially the three pillars that Judaism offers us, offers all human beings. Torah, Avodah, Gemilas Chasadim, which means studying, being aware of this element by studying it, as we are doing now. The second thing is prayer, designating time where you speak to your soul and allow your soul to speak to you and to God. And the third thing is Gemilas Chasadim, kindness, acts of kindness, charity, generosity, in time, in sensitivity, and anything that we can offer to another person. These three are tools. These are tools that dig through the hard husks of material selfishness and material insecurity to reach the security and the confidence that is your birthright that comes from your soul. To cut through all that noise, that extracurricular noise, to access that gentle, subtle song that makes you tick. So, and recognizing, as a result as well, that when you're interacting with people, check yourself. Instead of doing something, trying to do something, maybe try to withhold. And recognize that can take more power than the act can take less power than the restraint. Yielding can take much more strength and energy and more power than not yielding. Like it says, a person should always be as flexible like a reed and not as inflexible like a cedar. So when you see the wind blow, the strong winds blow, what falls in the wind? Those that stand strong and they don't know how to yield. A reed, a strand of reed will never be destroyed in a storm. I'm not talking about certain storms destroy everything, but I'm talking about many winds because it yields. It just yields. You know, suspension bridges, the engineering of a suspension bridge is based on this yielding principle. If you ever walk on a bridge that's a suspension bridge, you'll see it shakes while cars are going and you think it's about the collapse. No, the shaking allows the bridge to carry far more weight than regular bridges that are built on concrete. Because there, it's just their sheer power. And here, the suspension bridge, the yielding, allows, it's like a lot of martial arts are built. The Oriental martial arts are built on letting someone else's power empower you. Instead of you punching them, let their punch be absorbed, etc., etc. So it's about maneuvering, and far more yielding gives more power than pure sheer metal or stone. So you have the power of yielding everywhere. When they built now the Freedom Tower or the World Trade Centers, a big part of the engineering is what it does to when the wind. Remember, these buildings are standing 100 stories high. There's very heavy, strong winds. How does the wind not blow out a window? So part of it is that the building actually shifts a bit. It's not that it's built so strong to resist any wind. On the contrary, it's built to shift with the wind. And this is true with everything, with airplanes, which of course emulate birds. They're all about navigating the tides. A good swimmer is not someone that can swim against any tide. A good swimmer knows when to swim and when to surrender, when to, so to speak, tread water and let the tide carry you. And then when it calms down, to move forward. It's all thing about life. You'll see very many people, when they're in the moment when they're desperate, they suddenly start thrashing about, And that makes it far more, they complicate and entangle themselves much more because they make that emotional mistake of trying to solve it right there and then. Like the drowning victim syndrome. What's a drowning victim? Lifeguards have to be taught because when someone's drowning, they're so desperate they'll pull down anything that comes their way, even someone that's coming to save them. So the key is to realize that sometimes the way to solve a problem is not to fight it. It's to yield to it. And as I said, the list goes on. It's a set of tools that we have to develop that really are not really taught to us because in elementary school and military school and so on, we're taught the tools of aggression. We're taught how to get something. When I say again aggression, I don't necessarily mean it in the full negative sense. It means we're taught the tools of going and getting something instead of yielding and absorbing, which is a whole different process. I've talked about this many times in my own experience. Remembering hours and hours of talks is all about absorbing knowledge and listening instead of speaking. We are far better speakers than we are listeners. I'm not saying we're such good speakers, because if you can't listen well, you can't speak well. But we think we're good speakers. We're a gift of gab. We talk, we have a lot to say. But listening is a whole different art. And it's harder to listen than to speak. So, as I said, the list goes on. I want to wish everybody, let's use this evening as an opportunity to access a deeper dimension of our so-called restraint. And obviously you have to know when to restrain. Sometimes you have to know when to fight. Sometimes, like what they say, know when to hold them, when to fold them. But that's where it comes the wisdom of the methodology of knowing when to forge ahead and when to yield. And that really is a case-by-case thing that comes with time. But I think that in the world we live in, we need to develop far more of those tools of the no being stronger than the yes. That quiet little still place. I wish you all to be able to have moments like that, if not more than moments, where you can just sit alone on a couch and just kick your shoes off and just be comfortable with your stillness, comfortable with your quietude, with your inner self. Many people are terrified of the concept because they don't feel they have a good self to embrace. So they get themselves busy, doing this, going out, partying, and so on. But you should know you do have a pure, gentle voice, music inside you. You have to find people that encourage, that validate that support that make you feel confident in it, and then do whatever it takes. The things I said before: study, prayer, and tzedakah and chesed, kindness, to nourish and nurture that dimension. So again, the class is dedicated in honor of Chaim, Sarah, Hillel, Isaac, and Simon Caputo. And we will have another class next week, as always, Wednesdays. Philip is giving, I believe, his class tomorrow night. I'm not positive, actually, because of the holiday. Maybe not. I'll have to check. And please stay in touch. meaningfullife.com. We send out weekly emails, developing new programs, and as we go along, in any other way we can help you in your personal spiritual journey. That's what we're here for. Thank you, and everyone have a very good week.